From New York, this is Democracy Now!
The jury having reached a verdict, Ms. Geiger and your team, would you please stand? We, the jury, unanimously find the defendant, Amber Geiger, guilty of murder as charged in the indictment.
A white off-duty police officer who shot and killed a 26-year-old black man in his own home in Dallas has been convicted of murder. The verdict came down Tuesday, more than a year after off-duty police officer Amber Geiger entered Botham Jean's apartment, mistaking it for her own, and shot and killed him. One of his lawyers called the verdict a victory for black people in America. We'll speak with civil rights attorney Benjamin Crump, one of the lawyers for the family of Botham Jean. His new memoir, Open Season, Legalized Genocide of Colored People. As China holds the largest military parades ever in Beijing to mark 70 years of the People's Republic of China, in Hong Kong, police escalate violence against protests by firing live ammunition at demonstrators.
Right now, as you can see, the riot police and the Hong Kong government is trying to suppress that freedom everywhere by beating up people randomly and using excessive force by the police. So I think it's important to come out to show to the Hong Kong government as well as Beijing that we are not afraid.
We'll speak with Kevin Lin. He wrote the article, How Should the U.S. Left Think About China? Then to Haiti, where massive anti-government protests calling for the resignation of the U.S.-backed president, Jovenel Moïse, continue to escalate.
People are fighting and the government is repressing it. The town is on the street to dismiss Jovenel. To expel Jovenel means the solution to hunger. To dismiss Jovenel means solution to the murders in the popular neighborhoods, as we see in La Saline, Tokyo, Grand Ravine, and Fort National. Being on the street is a political battle against the system.
We'll get an update from Jacqueline Charles of the Miami Herald. This is Democracy Now! All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The New York Times is reporting President Trump privately pushed for shooting migrants and for creating a, quote, water-filled trench stocked with snakes or alligators along the U.S.-Mexico border. The New York Times also details how Trump has privately proposed other radical measures to curtail immigration, including closing the entire U.S.-Mexico border and building an electrified border wall topped with spikes to pierce human flesh. The Times reveals Trump has repeatedly raised the idea of shooting migrants during staff meetings. The paper reports, quote, after publicly suggesting that soldiers shoot migrants if they threw rocks, the president backed off when his staff told him that was illegal. But later in a meeting, aides recalled he suggested they shoot migrants in the legs to slow them down. That's not allowed either, they told him, unquote. The Times article is based on a new book, Border Wars, Inside Trump's Assault on Immigration, by Times reporters Michael Shear and Julie Hirschfeld Davis. President Trump is continuing to lash out at House Democrats for opening an impeachment inquiry after he pressured the president of Ukraine to investigate his political rival, Joe Biden. On Tuesday, Trump wrote on Twitter, quote, I'm coming to the conclusion that what is taking place is not an impeachment, it's a coup, Trump wrote. This comes as Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is attempting to prevent 5 current and former State Department officials from being questioned as part of the House impeachment inquiry. Pompeo accused House Democrats of attempting to, quote, intimidate, bully, and treat improperly State Department officials. However, the Trump administration's former special envoy for Ukraine, Kurt Volker, who resigned last week, is expected to testify in private Thursday. Meanwhile, the State Department's Inspector General is heading to Capitol Hill today to give what's been described as an urgent briefing to staffers from several House and Senate committees. In other impeachment-related news, the most senior Republican in the Senate, Chuck Grassley, is publicly supporting the anonymous intelligence official who blew the whistle on President Trump's interactions with Ukraine. Grassley wrote, quote, this person appears to have followed the whistleblower protection laws and ought to be heard out and protected. We should always work to respect whistleblowers, Grassley said. In news from Dallas, Texas, a white police officer was convicted Tuesday of murdering her 26-year-old black neighbor in his own apartment in 2018. The off-duty officer claimed to have accidentally entered Botham Jean's apartment, where she shot and killed him, thinking he was an intruder. Jean's apartment was located one floor below Geiger's in a Dallas apartment building. The Dallas Morning News reports Geiger is the first Dallas police officer to be convicted of murder since the 1970s. Outside the courtroom, Lee Merritt, a lawyer for Botham Jean's family, welcomed the conviction.
We still have the sentencing phase to go, but this is a huge victory, not only for the family of Botham Jean, but as his mother Allison told me a moment ago, this is a victory for black people in America. It's a signal that the tide is going to change here. Police officers are going to begin to be held accountable for their actions, and we believe that will begin to change policing culture all over the world.
We'll speak with another of the lawyers for the Botham Jean family, Benjamin Crump, after headlines. A federal judge in Georgia has temporarily blocked the state from implementing one of the most restrictive abortion laws in the country. The law would have banned abortion when a fetal heartbeat can be detected, which often occurs at around 6 weeks into pregnancy before many women even realize they're pregnant. Emily Nestler of the Center for Reproductive Rights said, quote, "The court recognized today this law is blatantly unconstitutional and a clear attempt to overturn Roe v. Wade." North Korea is facing accusations it test-fired a ballistic missile from sea earlier today. Some observers believe the test may have involved an underwater-launched missile. The test came just days before North Korea and the United States are expected to reopen nuclear talks. In Hong Kong, hundreds of protesters staged a sit-in today outside the school of an 18-year-old protester who was shot by police during violent protests Tuesday. It marked the first time Hong Kong police have used live ammunition on protesters since demonstrations began 17 weeks ago. The student who was shot, Sang Chi-kin, is reported to be in stable condition. Hong Kong officials defended the use of live ammunition, saying the police officer feared for his life. 96 protesters were arrested Tuesday on rioting charges. We'll have more on Hong Kong later in the broadcast. In Israel, pre-trial hearings have begun in Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's corruption trial. He's accused of bribery, fraud, and breach of trust. The hearings are taking place as Netanyahu is attempting to form a unity government following last month's deadlocked election. Netanyahu could face possible arrest if he does not remain prime minister. It looks like he's been unsuccessful in forming that unity government. In news from Latin America, Peru is facing its biggest political crisis in decades as the nation's president and vice president are both claiming to be the lawful leader of the country. On Monday, the Peruvian president, Martín Vizcarra, invoked a constitutional provision to dissolve Congress and call for new parliamentary elections. Congress responded by suspending Vizcarra as president and declaring his vice president, Mercedes Arauz, to be Peru's interim president. Recent public opinion show their support for Vizcarra's move to dissolve Congress, in part because right-wing lawmakers have repeatedly blocked efforts by the administration to fight corruption. The United Nations is calling on European nations to do more to help migrants attempting to cross the Mediterranean Sea. For the 6th year in a row, more than 1,000 migrants have died at sea attempting to reach Europe. Liz Throssell is a spokesperson for the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Refugees.
The figures do show that we have passed the very sad milestone of 1,000 deaths so far in 2019, and that is the 6th year in a row that we have passed 1,000 deaths. What I can stress is, of course, the numbers of people attempting to cross the Mediterranean are much lower, so that points to the fact that the journeys themselves are much more dangerous.
A city in Mississippi is claiming a man who was shot dead inside his own home by a police officer 2 years ago has no constitutional rights because he was an undocumented immigrant, not a U.S. citizen. An attorney for the city of South Haven, Mississippi, made this argument in a recent court filing after the family of Ismael Lopez filed a civil lawsuit. Lopez was shot dead inside his own home when police shot through his front door. The police were attempting to serve a search warrant to one of Lopez's neighbors, but went to the wrong house. The city's attorney wrote, quote, "Ismael Lopez may have been a person on American soil, but he was not one of the we the people of the United States entitled to the civil rights invoked in this lawsuit," unquote. A lawyer for the Lopez family described the city's position as, quote, "the most insane thing I've ever heard," unquote. The attorney said the city is essentially arguing that because Lopez is an undocumented immigrant, it's okay for the city of South Haven to kill him. In technology news, a federal appeals court has largely upheld the Federal Communications Commission's 2017 repeal of net neutrality protections. But the court did rule that individual states can pass their own net neutrality regs. Supporters of net neutrality say protections are needed to preserve an open Internet and to bar Internet service providers from stopping or slowing down the delivery of websites. Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg has privately slammed Senator Elizabeth Warren's proposal to break up Facebook and other tech giants. On Tuesday, the technology website The Verge published a leaked audio recording of Zuckerberg saying a Warren presidency would, quote, suck for the company, and that he may sue the U.S. government if it attempts to break up the company.
Like Elizabeth Warren, who thinks that the right answer is to break up the companies, if she gets elected president, then I would bet that we will have a legal challenge, and I would bet that we will win the legal challenge. Does that still suck for us? Yeah. I don't have to, have a major lawsuit against our own government. That's not like the position that you want to be in when you're, it's like we care about our country and want to work with our government to do good things. And But look, at the end of the day, if someone's going to try to threaten something that existential, you go to the mat and you fight.
The words of Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg. Senator Elizabeth Warren responded on Twitter by writing, quote, what would really suck is if we don't fix a corrupt system that lets giant companies like Facebook engage in illegal, anti-competitive practices, stomp on consumer privacy rights, and repeatedly fumble their responsibility to protect our democracy, Warren wrote. In other campaign news, President Trump's re-election campaign and the Republican National Committee raised a record $125 million in the third quarter of the year, far higher than any Democrat. Bernie Sanders reported Tuesday he raised $25 million. It's the largest quarterly sum to be reported so far by any Democratic candidate, but it's just a fifth of what Trump and the RNC raised. In labor news, tens of thousands of child care providers in California have gained the right to unionize under a new law signed Monday. The law will impact 40,000 workers at daycare centers that get state subsidies. While the child care workers won't be considered state employees, they will be able to collectively bargain over wages and other issues. Child care providers have been organizing around the issue for 16 years. In a victory for backers of affirmative action, a federal judge has ruled Harvard University's undergraduate admissions office does not discriminate against Asian American applicants. The ruling came in a case brought by Students for Fair Admissions, which has long opposed affirmative action. And today marks 1 year since the Saudi-born Washington Post columnist Jamal Khashoggi was brutally assassinated inside the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. The masterminds of the killing remain at large. Last year, the CIA concluded Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman had ordered Khashoggi's killing, but the prince remains a close ally of the U.S. government. Earlier today, Khashoggi's widow and Washington Post owner Jeff Bezos attended a vigil outside the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. Meanwhile, a U.S.-based law firm has revealed it has filed a petition at the International Criminal Court to have the Saudi Crown Prince be investigated for crimes against humanity, including the murder of Khashoggi. This comes as a number of top U.S. executives are planning to head to Saudi Arabia later this month to participate in an investment conference known as Davos in the Desert. Democratic presidential candidate Bernie Sanders criticized the companies participating. He wrote on Twitter, quote, the greed of Goldman Sachs, J.P. Morgan, Citigroup, and BlackRock is insatiable. Who cares if the Saudis are starving millions of Yemeni civilians or that our planet faces a climate emergency? Profiting off of $1.5 trillion in Saudi oil is just too important, Sanders wrote. President Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, is also expected to attend. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. A white police officer who shot and killed a 26-year-old black man in his own home in Dallas in 2018 has been convicted of murder. The verdict came down Tuesday, more than a year after off-duty police officer Amber Geiger killed Botham Jean. Geiger claimed during trial that she accidentally entered Jean's apartment and shot him, thinking he was an intruder. Jean's apartment was located one floor below Geiger's in the Dallas apartment building. This is Judge Tammy Kemp delivering the verdict.
The jury having reached a verdict, Ms. Geiger and your team, would you please stand? We, the jury, unanimously find the defendant, Amber Geiger, guilty of murder as charged in the indictment.
Family and community members in the courthouse erupted in celebration at the news. In the hallways, spectators chanted, "Black Lives Matter." Geiger is the first Dallas police officer to be convicted of murder since the 1970s. This, according to the Dallas Morning News. This is Lee Merritt, one of the lawyers for Botham Jean's family.
We still have the sentencing phase to go, but this is a huge victory, not only for the family of Botham Jean, but as his mother Allison told me a moment ago, this is a victory for black people in America. It's a signal that the tide is going to change here. Police officers are going to begin to be held accountable for their actions, and we believe that will begin to change policing culture all over the world.
Amber Geiger faces up to 99 years in prison. This is the family's lawyer, Benjamin Crump, speaking Tuesday.
This verdict is for Trayvon Martin. It's for Michael Brown. It's for Sandra Bland. It's for Tamir Rice. It's for Eric Gardner. It's for Antoine Rose. It's for Jamel Roberts. For E.J. Bradford. For Stephon Clark. For Jeffrey Dennis. Genevieve Dawes. For Pamela Turner. For so many unarmed black and brown human beings all across America. This verdict today is for them.
After the jury returned its verdict, prosecutors introduced racist and offensive text messages and social media posts written by Geiger in which she joked about Martin Luther King Jr.'s death and called herself a racist. Well, for more, we go to Dallas, Texas, to speak with Benjamin Crump, an attorney for the family of Botham Jean. He's the author of the upcoming memoir, Open Season, Legalized Genocide of Colored People. Welcome back to Democracy Now!, Ben Crump. First of all, just overall respond to the verdict. As we speak, the sentence has not been decided.
Correct. But it was a historic verdict yesterday, just in the fact, my co-counsels, Darrell Washington and Lee Merritt, we believe that this is the first time that a white policewoman has ever been convicted of murder of a black man in America. So we don't underscore this decision by this jury in any way. It was a huge verdict, not just for Botham Jean's family, but for so many others who never got justice for the unjustified killings of their loved ones. And the one thing I would say, Amy, is Botham Jean was a near-perfect person of color. And I believe that the jury took that into account as they were deliberating. But it shouldn't take you being a near-perfect person of color for an unarmed person of color to get justice in America. And so we are still trying to say that everybody, regardless of your social status or the index of your income, should get equal justice under the law. That's what the Constitution says.
I want to turn to Botham Jean's mother, Allison, testifying Tuesday after the verdict was delivered.
My life has not been the same. It's just been like a roller coaster. I cannot sleep. I cannot eat. It's just been the most terrible time for me. I'm not able to work, but I just try to busy myself just to see if it will get out of my head. But it's been very, very, very difficult.
That's Botham Jean's mother, Allison. Again, the decision on the sentence will be made, we believe, today. Ben Crump,
yes.
If you could give us the narrative of exactly what happened for those people who haven't followed this just unbelievable case. You have Amber Geiger. She has worked her day on her job, and then describe what happens and when it was.
Certainly. Amber Geiger, a Dallas police officer who lives in the same apartment complex as Botham Jones, this 26-year-old, highly educated African-American man who was a certified public accountant working for Price Waterhouse Cooper. She lives on the 3rd floor. Right above her, Botham Jones lives on the 4th floor. She comes and she gets off on the wrong floor, and she puts her key into Botham's apartment. At this apartment complex, they've had some issues, apparently, with the doors. Many witnesses testified. But when she puts her key in the door opens. At that point, she says, understand that she heard somebody moving around in the apartment. Now, she's a well-trained police officer, allegedly. Her training tells her if she thinks it's a burglar or somebody doing something nefarious in her apartment, at that point, the best thing for her to do is to set up a perimeter, call for backup. The police department is less than 2 miles away. They will be there within 90 seconds. The cavalry, the K-9 unit, everybody give her cover. And they can give out verbal commands, and they can de-escalate the situation if it really is a nefarious situation. But she doesn't do any of that. She testifies that when she heard that, she said she assumed it was a burglar or a threat, and she was going in to take the threat out. And that's exactly what she did. The unfortunate tragedy is that it was Botham Jones' apartment. He was in there eating a bowl of ice cream, watching the football game, working, doing everything he had the legal right to do. And unfortunately, because she prejudged the situation, she shot first and asked questions later, this light in this world has been taken away from us. And it's something his family will never get over. So that's why you heard his mother breaking down on the witness stand, because he was truly a light for this world that was so desperately needed. And the last thing I will say is that Amber Geiger, she tried to say that it was the worst day of her life and that she doesn't think anybody can understand that this is the worst day of her life. The prosecutors, when they cross-examined her, they pointed out the fact, but you didn't treat it like you had made this terrible mistake. You were texting on the phone with your partner/lover. You were not trying to render any aid to this unarmed person who you had now realized was innocent and that you were in the wrong apartment. So it was these things here that were so unbelievably outrageous that she did on multiple occasions that I believe led the jury to say that you do not get the benefit of consideration or mistake based on all the decisions that you made to kill this unarmed black man in his own apartment.
I'm looking at a piece in the New York Times today, Ben, and it says, talking about now the sentencing phase of this trial, whether she'll get, she faces between 5 and 99 years in prison. And it says prosecutors sought, the jury, which will decide the length of punishment, began hearing testimony in the sentencing portion of the trial. Prosecutors sought to draw the jury's attention to past social media posts by Ms. Geiger, including a post, "Kill first, die last," that she'd saved to a page for quotes and inspiration. The prosecution also highlighted a text they said Ms. Geiger sent while working at a parade celebrating the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. When asked when the festivities would end, she wrote, "When MLK is dead, oh wait." Ben Crump.
Yeah, it's just shocking, these posts that this police officer was sending to her partner, Martin Rivera, who she was having an affair with. And remember, she was sexting with him 20 minutes before she killed Botham Jones. But there are many posts where she said, I wear black and I have a gun, so don't F with me because I'm already dressed for your funeral. And so I think these posts kind of give us some perspective of her mentality. And I don't know if she is racist. I don't know the woman at all, but these posts certainly suggest that she had an issue with people of color because there were some other posts in there where she suggested what to do with the crowds of the diverse crowds of people who were celebrating at the Martin Luther King parade, how you should just mace them and do these other things that violate their constitutional rights. So I think the jury will have all of these things to consider when they put a verdict for the sentence of this white policewoman, Amber Geiger, who killed this unarmed black man in his own apartment in Dallas, Texas.
I'm wondering your response to activists calling for the resignation of Dallas Police Union President Mike Mata over the alleged special treatment he gave Amber Geiger. Prosecutors arguing Mata instructed a Dallas police sergeant to turn off the recording system inside the patrol car that would transport Geiger to the station after the shooting. Your response?
No, it's no question they treated her differently than they would have treated any other suspect who had just killed an unarmed person in their own apartment. They were violating policies when they said turn off the video camera, instructing her not to say anything, because these were all people who she associated with on a regular basis. So it was almost as if they were trying to come up with a justification for this unjustifiable killing from day one. From moment one, they were trying to conspire how to make sure she would walk and not be held accountable for this crime. And when you really think about it, when you listen to the 911 tape, she never once said that she felt threatened by Botham Jean, that he was charging her or anything like that. She just said that she messed up. She went to the wrong apartment. She's sorry. She's sorry. And this call was about 19 minutes. It was only after she had talked to and we believe been coached by the union president and others that she came up with this notion to say, well, I felt threatened. I thought he was going to kill me. And remember, the United States Supreme Court has given the instructions to all police officers when they kill unarmed people of color. All you have to do is say, I felt threatened. I felt in fear of my life. And normally that means you get a get out of jail pass free card for killing black and brown people. And I think that's what people are so outraged about in the activist and civil rights community, that this union president can do this, be caught on tape doing it, and have no consequences, just like her and her partner/lover who was married deleting text messages from their phones, knowing that that was a vital part of the criminal investigation into the death of Botham Jean.
Finally, the message you think this sends to the African-American community, to the United States of America, every population, Ben Crump.
Yeah, Amy, I think this is a precedent-setting case in many ways. We pray that it will decrease the hashtags of unarmed black and brown people being killed by the people who are supposed to protect and serve us. We hope that it sends the message to the police departments that your officers should be following the policies of de-escalation so we can have conflict resolution and not this shoot first, ask questions later mentality when it comes to interactions with black and brown people. And the last thing for society as a whole, we pray that it will be a precedent to reaffirm what the United States Constitution has emblazoned on our society, that it is equal justice under the law.
I want to thank you so much for being with us. Ben Crump, civil rights attorney for the family of Botham Jean. He's the author of the upcoming memoir, Open Season, Legalized Genocide of Colored People. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. When we come back, the protests in Hong Kong. And then we'll talk about protests in Haiti. Stay with us.
Let the Spirit of the Lord rise among us. Let the Spirit of the Lord and let it rise. You gotta let the Spirit of the Lord and let it rise. Among us and let the praises of our King and let it rise. Come on, let it rise. You gotta let it rise and sing, oh, 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 oh. Come on, let it rise. You gotta let the glory, let the glory, let it, and let the glory of the Lord and let it rise. You gotta let the glory of the Lord and let it rise. Oh, you gotta let the praises of our King and let it rise. Come on, let it rise. I'm singing, whoa, whoa, whoa.
Botham Jean singing Let the Spirit of the Lord Rise. He would have been 28 last Sunday. He was killed by Amber Geiger, the Dallas police officer. She has been convicted of murder. This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman. As China holds the largest military parades ever in Beijing to mark 70 years of the People's Republic of China, we turn to Hong Kong, where police escalated violence against protests Tuesday by firing live ammunition at demonstrators. In a video of the police shooting posted online, an 18-year-old protester named Tony Tsang is seen in a group of people who are chasing a riot police officer. They tackle him to the ground, appear to beat him. Then another riot officer approaches with his gun drawn. The teen appears to try to hit him, and the officer fires at him at point-blank range, shooting him in the chest. Police also fired tear gas and water cannons, while protesters were seen throwing Molotov cocktails. The teen's reportedly in stable condition. The Hong Kong police commissioner said he has been arrested, but they'll decide later whether to press charges. Hong Kong officials defended the use of live ammunition, saying the police officer feared for his life. 96 protesters were arrested Tuesday on rioting charges. The Hong Kong Public Doctors Association spoke out against the police for failing to use less lethal weapons, such as beanbag rounds. The principal at the teen's school said he would not be punished and would keep his place in the school. His schoolmates denounced the police actions Wednesday during a sit-in of hundreds of protesters outside his school.
He often said that he would rather die than be arrested, because those police officers are inhuman. After the arrest, they would beat you with no reason. Unfortunately, it happened to him. He has sacrificed a lot for Hong Kong, but we could not reach our aim. As his schoolmates and brothers, we are very proud of him. But we should think, even when secondary school students start to come out and fight against unfairness in this society, isn't there a serious problem in this society?
Protesters vowed Wednesday to continue demonstrations. A new focus of the protests has been Chinese businesses and those with pro-Beijing links. Demonstrators have also targeted Starbucks after the daughter of the local company that operates the coffee chain stores condemned protesters at the UN Human Rights Council. At least 96 protesters were arrested on Tuesday on rioting charges. This comes as Reuters reports there are now up to 12,000 Chinese troops in Hong Kong, twice as many as when the protests began. For more, we go to Washington, D.C., where we're joined by Kevin Lin, China Program Officer at the International Labor Rights Forum. Was born and raised in Beijing, has spent years researching the labor movement and civil society in China. His most recent piece is for Jacobin. It's headlined 4 points on the Hong Kong protests. He's also author of How Should the U.S. Left Think About China? Welcome to Democracy Now! Kevin, start off by responding to what's happening right now in Hong Kong, the shooting of the protester, and what all this means now on the 70th anniversary of China.
Thanks, Amy. I think the shooting, as you mentioned, is the first time the Hong Kong police used live ammunition against directly shooting at a protester for the first time since the start of these protests back in June. And they really represent a huge escalation of violence. However, we have seen in the last several weeks the escalation of police violence are really pointing towards, a huge increase in the use of coercive forces by the police. The Amnesty International has done a really good investigation documenting an alarming pattern of arbitrary arrests, beatings, and torture of protesters in detention centers. And we have also seen a really good report by the New York Times pointing to the fact that there are police officers undercover posing as protesters in order to arrest and beat protesters. So we have really beginning to see a huge escalation of police violence against the protesters, and it's hugely symbolic that this happened at a time of the military parade that commemorates the 70th anniversary of the People's Republic of China.
Reuters is reporting that China recently doubled its troop presence in Hong Kong. The significance of this, Kevin?
I think this is what a lot of people have been really fearing, that there will be a Tiananmen-style crackdown, even though I think our analysis is that this is very unlikely because any military crackdown in Hong Kong would really lead to huge casualties, civilian casualties in Hong Kong, but it also will basically end Hong Kong as we know it as a semi-autonomous and region with relatively political freedom. So, even though we do not think or we do not anticipate a huge military crackdown by the Chinese government, the doubling of the troops and also all the threats issued by the Chinese government are hugely concerning.
Kevin Lin, you grew up in China. Can you talk about, in mainland China, the response to the Hong Kong protests? You've written a piece, 4 points on the Hong Kong protests, and talked about how the left should think about what's happening right now. Can you expand on that?
Sure. I think two things. On the response and the perspective of people in mainland China, what we see over the last few months is a attempt by the Chinese government to control the narrative of what's happening in Hong Kong. Basically, independent reporting is almost not possible in mainland China on Hong Kong. So there's only one really major source of news, which is the state-owned media. So that means the Hong Kong protest is portrayed almost exclusively as this senseless mob violence without providing the context and understanding of the reasons why there's such a huge mass-based protest movement that at one point involved 1 to 2 million demonstrators on the street back in July. So the result of that is there's an increase in nationalistic sentiment in China right now, and a lot of hostility in mainland China toward the Hong Kong protest. In terms of what the left should approach this issue, I think there is a legitimate concern about U.S. or U.K. influence. There's a concern about color revolution or foreign interference. But I think, even though I think that is a legitimate concern, we cannot ignore the fact this is a huge, massive social movement that goes beyond, there could be elements, people in the movement that look to the U.S. and U.K. for support, but the movement as a whole has very legitimate concerns that are found to be found in the political dynamics and development in Hong Kong itself.
Kevin Lin, you've written that Xi Jinping has gained a lot of legitimacy in mainland China by cracking down on government corruption. What's the role of Hong Kong in corruption in mainland China, specifically in the banking sector?
Absolutely. I think one of the intentions and one of the justifications that the extradition bill which sparked the protest, the reason it was introduced, at least the justification of that was there will be criminals fleeing from mainland China to Hong Kong, and there needs to be a law that allows, that enables the Chinese government, mainland Chinese government, to extradite criminals, especially corrupt officials, from Hong Kong. And what we see right now is, as you pointed out, that Xi Jinping has been a pretty popular leader within China because of the corruption campaign, anti-corruption campaign, but also because he has been adopting a much more assertive leadership style, which, at least on the surface, try to sort of promote nationalism and try to assert China's influence both in the region and globally. And I think that has been a issue that kind of colors how mainland Chinese population, public looks at Hong Kong, because they see Hong Kong as this kind of troublemaker that is being manipulated by the West against China.
And can you talk about the inequality in Hong Kong and whether that has anything to do with the intensity and the duration of the protests? According to Oxfam, inequality in Hong Kong is the highest it's been in some 45 years, almost half a century. And what is the reason for that?
Absolutely. So Hong Kong is one of the most unequal society anywhere, and this is not accidental. Hong Kong, which was a British colony for 100 years, was set up exactly as a trading port and as a financial center later on. So inequality is almost built into the system, in the sense that the financial capital and property owners are very, very powerful, and as a result of that, the population, there is a lot of wealth, but there is a huge amount of inequality as well. And inequality coupling with, for example, housing issues, that there is almost a housing crisis, especially for young people who really couldn't afford owning their own houses, apartments, and as well as fairly poor economic job prospect for young people. I think those factors do have a huge influence on creating discontent in Hong Kong society, which fueled this protest.
So some have suggested that the Hong Kong protests have been spurred by U.S. support. Some protesters have been carrying the U.S. flag, the British Union Jack, have met with Trump administration officials, come to Washington. What's your response to that, Kevin?
I think there are two points to be made. The first is that we should recognize there are certainly individuals, activists, and groups in the movement, which is, again, very massive, that look to the U.S. and U.K. for international support. I think in the long term, from progressive perspective, it's not going to help Hong Kong in the long term. But we can also understand in the short term, this is kind of driven by desperation when they confront very powerful Hong Kong and Chinese authority. But I think we should also recognize the people that come to the U.S. to look for support, both the so-called pan-democrats, those are the democratic parties and oppositions in Hong Kong, as well as the young youth leadership that came out of the umbrella movement in 2014. They are no longer the leaders in the current protest movement. They themselves recognize and have acknowledged they are no longer the leaders. So even though they could be support from the U.S. government or U.K. government, they are really, the people they're supporting are really no longer the leaders.
So talk about where you see this all headed, Kevin Lin, and has anything surprised you in your years of work on issues in China and Hong Kong?
I think there are, what is not surprising, I should start with, is the increased repression. And that started, well, at least this escalated since the ascendance of Xi Jinping administration in 2013. We have seen a huge increase in state repression against social movements, and that includes labor, feminists, people who work on anti-discrimination, human rights lawyers, religious freedom. It's across-the-board repression against social movement activists in mainland China. And so what we see in Hong Kong is that repression kind of coming over the border, if you will, to Hong Kong. So in that sense, we're now surprised. What we are surprised is more by the response of the Hong Kong public, because for many years, a lot of people in Hong Kong believe the new generation, the younger generation in Hong Kong are apolitical. They don't care about politics. But what we have seen in this last few months is a very involved, very engaged public that tries to push back against illegitimate state actions.
Kevin Lin, we want to thank you so much for being with us. China Program Officer at the International Labor Rights Forum, born and raised in Beijing, has spent years researching the labor movement and civil society in China. His recent piece for Jacobin is headlined 4 Points on the Hong Kong Protests. Also, we will link to your piece, How Should the U.S. Left Think About China? When we come back, we turn to Haiti, where massive anti-government protests calling for the resignation of U.S.-backed President Jovenel Moïse continue to escalate. Stay with us.
Ça va? Mon cher cousine, moi-même la cuisine. Mon manger plein, mon bois du vin, et ça pas coûte à rien. Et là-bas, et là-bas, et là-bas, et là-bas, et là-bas, cher, et là-bas, cher. Comment ça va? Comment ça va? Yo tué cochon, yo tué lapin, et mon manger plein.
Elabath by Layla Makala and the Special Men. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We end today's show in Haiti, where massive anti-government protests calling for the resignation of the U.S.-backed President Jovenel Moïse continue to escalate. The worsening economic crisis, a shortage of fuel and food, and corruption allegations against Moïse have sent protesters to the streets on and off for over a year. Hundreds demonstrated in the capital Port-au-Prince on Monday, and another protest is scheduled today. Much of Port-au-Prince has been on lockdown for the past 2 weeks. At least 4 people have been killed in recent days after Haitian police opened fire on protesters using live ammunition and tear gas. This is Haitian protester Charles Fanfan.
We demand a clean slate to change the system. The potential departure of Haitian President Jovenel doesn't mean that things will just change. We're going to continue fighting to achieve change in this diabolical system. They won't be able to kill us all. I'm certain that we will have victory.
Protesters are also demanding a deeper investigation into accusations that President Moïse and other Haitian top officials embezzled billions of dollars in proceeds from the Venezuelan-subsidized oil plan, PetroCaribe. Haiti hasn't had a prime minister since July, as the opposition has rejected Moïse's pick. As of last week, a new round of votes was indefinitely postponed after a ruling party senator pulled out a gun and shot at protesters, injuring an AP photojournalist and a security guard. As a new round of protests threatened to paralyze Port-au-Prince today, Moïse, who was elected in 2017, still refuses to step down. For more, we're joined by Jacqueline Charles, the Haiti and Caribbean correspondent at the Miami Herald. She's reported on Haiti for over a decade and was a Pulitzer Prize finalist for her coverage of the 2010 Haiti earthquake. Jacqueline, welcome to Democracy Now! It's great to have you with us. Can you describe what is happening and what's behind fueling these protests, and now a number of deaths in the protests?
Well, as you mentioned in your introduction, I mean, the economy is just free-falling. The inflation rate right now is about 20%. The country actually has not had a prime minister since March, although there are two individuals that have the title, but neither one has been confirmed through Parliament. I mean, the economy is worsening. Haitians are frustrated, and they have these chronic fuel shortages. I mean, Haiti's fuel bill right now is about $130 million that they owe. And what we have been seeing is that every couple of weeks, you can say, there's no fuel or people can't get fuel. So you have these long lines of individuals standing with these yellow jugs trying to get fuel. What we saw with the corruption allegations, I mean, there was a little bit of a quiet time, and then on May 31st, the Superior Court of Auditors, they released this 600-plus page report where they talked about the embezzlement of the Petrocaribe dollars, which Haiti currently owes Venezuela about $2 billion. And current President Jovenel Moise is among those who have been indicted or implicated actually in that report.
So let's go to Haiti's President Jovenel Moise addressing the nation last week at 2 in the morning. His speech came one day after a ruling party senator opened fire. He fired a gun to disperse protesters outside the Haitian parliament, injuring an AP photojournalist and a security guard. This is President Moise.
Après de multiples tentatives,
we have verified the Senate is not able to fulfill its constitutional obligations to give the country a legitimate government, rejecting the ratification of a general policy statement by two successive governments, ignoring the forms of the laws of the Republic and the democratic principles. 7 months ago, we registered 2 rejected sessions. I take notes. I've canceled the trip that I should have taken to participate in the UN General Assembly. I made that decision to address the country's problems. I am talking about the political, economic, and social situation. Haiti has long been facing difficult situations of misery, unemployment, insecurity, and political problems that block the functioning of schools by paralyzing other activities.
So that's the Haitian president, Moise. Jacqueline, can you tell us where he is right now?
Well, I heard that yesterday he finally did make it to the palace. Interesting enough, that speech, which was a pre-recorded address that he provided at 2 a.m. in the morning on Wednesday of last week, no one had heard from him or seen him in over a month. The last statements he had made or the last public appearance was on August 14 when he announced the reestablishment of the Haitian Armed Forces. And then after that address that came in at 2 a.m. in the morning, we had not heard from him. In fact, this week he called it in. He had a cabinet meeting with, his government officials, and he did it over the telephone. Yesterday, the Miami Herald wrote an editorial where basically it says, President Moise, you need to come out of hiding. And, we like to take a little bit of credit to think that he read that editorial and decided to actually go down to the palace yesterday.
Well, in an op-ed published in Al Jazeera Monday, political economist, climate policy expert Keston K. Perry wrote, quote, "The crisis started last year and was compounded by natural disasters that have repeatedly devastated the island nation. Hurricanes destroyed housing, food production, livelihoods, and infrastructure, and a severe drought dried up the island's water resources. While international media has focused on a familiar story of corruption and mismanagement, what lies beneath this debilitating crisis is much more serious. A deadly combination of neocolonialism, neoliberalism, and climate injustice. Indeed, what's happening now in Haiti is extreme and should scare us all, as it foreshadows what could happen to the rest of the planet if we do not take immediate action," he wrote. Can you respond, Jacqueline Charles?
I've seen that editorial, and there's a lot of chatter that's going on about it. But honestly, at the root of this is the issue of corruption. I think similar to what you're seeing in Hong Kong, this new generation of Haitians are saying, listen, we're not going to go to Chile. We're not going to go to Brazil and try to come to the United States. This is our country, and we need to change it. The system that was put in place after the fall of the dictatorship, in 1987, it's not working anymore. I mean, they're just basically fed up. When this incident happened, this latest round round of protests. The same day where you had the senator opening fire, days before, you had parliamentarians who went on the radio and publicly admitted to accepting bribes, to install President Jovenel Moise's latest choice for prime minister. And then you had another parliamentarian, a senator, who in fact says, I don't know any government in this country that has been confirmed without money passing hands. So when people heard that vote buying and they can't get fuel, they can't put their kids in school, their purchasing power has fallen by over 100% in 5 years. It's just enraging the population. And so when we look today, we see Haitians up in arms all over the place. Yes, the country has not recovered from the 2010 earthquake. It is still dealing with the fallout of Matthew. It is at a high risk of climate change. It dodged a huge bullet just a few weeks ago with Dorian, what we saw, what it did to the Bahamas. But for Haitians, if you talk to them, when you hear them on the streets, what they are denouncing is impunity and corruption that is happening. Their feeling is that because of mismanagement of the economy, because of the corruption, this is why the social situation is the way that it is. This is why there isn't fuel, or there's these chronic fuel shortages.
You mentioned the Bahamas, and you have, since the earthquake a decade ago in Haiti, thousands of Haitians fleeing to countries like the Bahamas, and now hit extremely hard in the Bahamas by that latest hurricane. Can you talk about this mass migration? Also, last night, Hillary Clinton gave a talk in Brooklyn, and there were Haitians protesting outside. I remember coming to Haiti after the earthquake and seeing President Bill Clinton, saying the only two things that matter to me now are my daughter's wedding and the rehabilitation of Haiti. The U.S. deeply involved with Haiti for so many years, and much of that not exactly constructive. Jacqueline Charles.
Yes, in fact, I was in the Bahamas just a couple of weeks ago, and the Haitians who were there are very concerned about their future and what's going to happen. When we look post-earthquake, there's been a huge migration, not just to the Bahamas, but to a country like Chile, where there's 100,000 Haitians that migrated in 1 year. That's 10% of Haiti's population. We also have Haitians on the U.S.-Mexico border today. Haitians have just gone anywhere they can go in order to try to get some sort of relief. And every time we see that the situation turns volatile in Haiti, we see Haitians either trying to get out by boat or they trying to get out by plane. And yes, after the earthquake, what you saw was President Clinton and the international community, especially the U.S., saying, we're going to do this, we're going to change things. I think there was a lot of promises that were made, including $13 billion, which I've been asking people in the last couple of weeks, do you think $13 billion came here? And they're telling me no, that $13 billion did not come here. Haitians have very mixed views. What they find is under President Obama, with Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State, the U.S. was really involved, especially in terms of the elections. So a lot of them hold the U.S. responsible for what's happening here with President Jovenel Moise, who was the handpicked successor of former President Michel Mateli. But with every Haitian election, there's always allegations of fraud. There's always issues. And even today, as Haitians are fighting for this change, right, in the back of their mind or at the forefront of it is, where does the U.S. stand on this question? Just recently, a few days ago, you had members of the opposition who sat down with the U.S. ambassador, the UN representative, and others from the donor community. And that meeting did not go very well, because what they are looking for is support in their mission, in their push to get President Jovenel Moise to resign. And he says he's not going to step down.
And finally, the Haitians that are in this country who are demanding that TPS be extended, President Trump wanting to kick them out, your response?
Well, Nancy Pelosi is going to be in Miami tomorrow, and she is going to be meeting with about 10 members of the Haitian community. She's going to be having a roundtable discussion. And U.S. Congresswoman Frederica Wilson, who represents the largest constituency of Haitian Americans, are going to be there, and they're going to hear from them where clearly the issue of temporary protected status is going to come up. Imagine right now, you see what's happening in Haiti, you see the protests, you see the economic situation, and you are in this country, you have temporary protected status, which is supposed to expire in January, albeit there are about 5 legal cases going through the courts right now. But to live with that kind of uncertainty and to hear the Trump administration say everything is well in Haiti, it very much is
Jacqueline Charles of Miami Herald, thanks so much for being with us. I'm Amy Goodman. This is Democracy Now!